The relief ship, the Hesperus, cut through the gray, churning waters of the North Atlantic. It was December 26, 1900. For weeks, the ship had been delayed by relentless storms. But now, finally, the island of Eilean Mor was in sight. A jagged black rock rising from the sea, crowned by its lighthouse. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. The lighthouse was dark. It was supposed to be a beacon of life, a constant, flashing pulse against the darkness. Instead, it was a dead silhouette against a winter sky. The captain ordered a flare fired. It shot into the air, a brief streak of red, but the island remained silent. They blew the ship's horn, a deep, mournful sound that was swallowed by the wind. No flag was raised at the lighthouse, no sign of life. On deck, the relief keeper, Joseph Moore, felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He knew the men on that rock. They were professionals, meticulous. For the light to be out, something catastrophic must have happened. Getting ashore was a battle. The sea crashed against the cliffs, sending plumes of white spray 100 feet into the air. Moore and a few sailors boarded a small dinghy, fighting the violent swell with every pull of the oars. The island wasn't a welcoming place. It was a fortress of stone, hostile and indifferent. After a harrowing approach, Moore leaped onto the slippery west landing platform. He began the long, steep climb up the crude stone steps carved into the cliff face. The wind howled in his ears, a physical force trying to tear him from his footing and hurl him into the churning sea below. He reached the small compound at the top, a world of stone and iron surrounded by an endless, angry ocean. The main gate to the compound was closed. He passed through it and walked to the heavy entrance door of the lighthouse tower. He reached for the handle, expecting it to be locked fast. It wasn't. The door was unlocked. This was the first true violation. A lighthouse is a ship on land. You secure every hatch, every door. An unlocked door meant chaos. It meant the rules had been broken. Moore pushed it open and stepped inside. The cold was immediate and profound. Not the damp chill of an unheated building, but a dead, tomb-like cold that suggested the fire had been out for many days. It seeped through his coat, into his bones. He called out their names. Thomas, James, Donald? His voice echoed up the spiral staircase, the only sound in the crushing silence. He moved cautiously into the small kitchen and living area. The scene that greeted him was a portrait of interrupted life. A table was set for a meal. A plate of cold mutton and pickles sat there, a fork resting beside it. But a single wooden chair was knocked over, thrown back with a violence that suggested its occupant had sprung to his feet in a moment of pure panic. He moved cautiously into the small kitchen and living area. The scene that greeted him was a portrait of interrupted life. A table was set for a meal. A plate of cold mutton and pickles sat there, a fork resting beside it. But a single wooden chair was knocked over, thrown back with a violence that suggested its occupant had sprung to his feet in a moment of pure panic. What could cause a seasoned keeper to jump up so suddenly he'd send his chair flying? Moore continued his search through the small Spartan quarters. The beds were unmade, the blankets tossed aside as if the men intended to return at any moment. But the air was thick with the feeling of abandonment. On a wall in the living area, a clock had stopped. Its hands were frozen at a few minutes before 2. A silent monument to the exact moment that time and life had run out for the keepers of Eilean Mor. He climbed the winding stairs to the very top of the tower, to the lamp room. Here, everything was in perfect order. The giant glass lens, the heart of the lighthouse, was polished to a brilliant shine. The brass mechanisms gleamed. The oil reservoirs for the lamp were full, the wicks trimmed, ready for the night's duty. The men had done their work. They had prepared the light, but they were not there to ignite it. This meticulous order made the chaos below even more disturbing. Returning to the living quarters, Mor's eyes fell on the keeper's logbook, left open on a small desk. He picked it up, his hands trembling slightly. The last few entries were bizarre, written in a hurried scrawl. They spoke of a storm, a dreadful storm, with winds the likes of which the writer had never seen. But shipping logs from the area showed the weather was calm on those days. The entries described one of the keepers, a giant of a man and a veteran seaman, as having been crying. Another entry spoke of the three men praying through the storm. It read less like a weather report and more like a descent into madness. Then Mor went back to the entrance hall, and he saw the final, impossible clue, the one that would haunt him for the rest of his life. On the wall were 3 hooks. On those hooks should have been 3 sets of heavy, waterproof oilskins, the keeper's only defense against the sea. 2 sets were gone, but 1 full set, the coat and trousers, was still hanging on its hook. His mind reeled, trying to make sense of it. 3 men worked here, Thomas Marshall, James Duckett, and Donald MacArthur. Why would one of them go out into a raging Atlantic storm without his protective gear? It was a death sentence. It was the one rule you never, ever broke. Unless you were running from something so terrifying that the storm outside seemed like the safer option. The island offered no bodies, no answers, only a set of impossible questions that twisted in on themselves. A locked room mystery on a desolate rock in the middle of the sea. This case defies all logic and pushes the human spirit to its breaking point. To join us on future expeditions into the unknown, subscribe to the channel right now. Now, to understand this tragedy, we must go back to the men themselves and the isolated rock they called home. Eilean Mor wasn't just an island. It was a prison of rock and water, a jagged tooth of rock jutting out of the furious North Atlantic. Part of the Flannan Isles, local sailors called them the 7 Hunters. They had a reputation, a dark one. For centuries, shepherds would bring their sheep here, but they would never, ever spend the night. They spoke of strange feelings, of a presence on the island that didn't welcome visitors. It was a place to be respected and feared. The cliffs were sheer, vertical drops, hundreds of feet straight into the churning, freezing sea. There were no trees to break the wind, no soft ground to cushion a fall. Just sharp, unforgiving stone and the constant, deafening scream of the gales. To be stationed here was one of the most isolated and psychologically demanding jobs in the entire world. Your only neighbors were the seabirds and the endless gray water. 3 men were assigned to this outpost in December of 1900. They were not adventurers seeking glory. They were working men, cogs in the great machine of the Northern Lighthouse Board. James Duckett was the principal keeper. At 43, he was a seasoned veteran with over 2 decades of service, a man who understood the sea's moods. He was the anchor of the group, a steady hand with a wife and 4 children waiting for him on the mainland. His life was one of order and responsibility. Thomas Marshall, the second assistant, was younger but also an experienced keeper. He was known to be quiet, a man who kept to himself. Then there was the wild card, Donald MacArthur. He wasn't a permanent keeper. He was an occasional, a tough-as-nails seaman from the mainland, filling in for another man on sick leave. MacArthur had a reputation. He was a brawler, a man with a short fuse who had seen his share of trouble. He was not a man built for quiet contemplation or the slow, grinding pressure of isolation. 3 men with 3 different temperaments and 3 different breaking points, locked together in a stone tube hundreds of feet above a lethal sea. Their mission was simple, but it was a matter of life and death for countless others. Keep the light burning. That single powerful beam of light was the only thing that stood between passing ships and the hidden rocks that could tear a hull to shreds. In these violent waters, a dead light was a death sentence for any vessel caught in a storm. Their life was a cycle of intense, repetitive routine, a structure designed to keep the mind from fracturing under the strain. Their world was the 75-foot lighthouse tower. Day after day, they would climb the winding spiral staircase. They would haul heavy canisters of paraffin up to the lamp room. They would polish the giant, intricate Fresno lens until it was spotless, ensuring every drop of light was cast as far as possible. Their world was the 75-foot lighthouse tower. Day after day, they would climb the winding spiral staircase. They would haul heavy canisters of paraffin up to the lamp room. They would polish the giant, intricate Fresno lens until it was spotless, ensuring every drop of light was cast as far as possible. They meticulously wound the clockwork mechanism that turned the massive lamp, a task that required precision and strength. Every detail of their existence was recorded in the official logbook: wind speed, weather conditions, oil consumption, any unusual occurrences. This log was more than a record. It was their proof of sanity, an attempt to impose human order on the raw chaos that surrounded them. Outside the tower, their duties were even more dangerous. The island had 2 landings, one on the east and one on the west, for bringing supplies ashore. Getting from the lighthouse to these landings required narrow, treacherous paths carved into the cliffside. A single misstep, a sudden gust of wind, and a man would be gone, swallowed by the waves below. A crane and derrick system was bolted into the rock at the west landing, used to hoist supplies and men from the relief boat. Maintaining this equipment, the ropes, the gears, the heavy supply box, was a critical and perilous part of their job. For weeks at a time, these 3 were the only humans for miles. The same faces at every meal, the same cramped living quarters, the same 4 stone walls. The only other sound was the ocean, a constant, pounding roar that vibrated through the very stone of the lighthouse. It wasn't a peaceful sound, it was a threat, a constant physical reminder of how small they were and how utterly trapped. They knew the risks. They understood the power of the sea better than anyone. But they were professionals, and they believed the thick stone walls of their tower could withstand anything the Atlantic could throw at it. They believed they were safe. They were wrong. In early December 1900, the Atlantic decided to show them what it was truly capable of. It didn't start with a bang, but with a whisper. An unnatural stillness fell over the island. The seabirds, usually a constant, screaming presence, vanished. The air grew heavy, thick, and the barometer inside the tower began to plummet at a rate that defied logic. The men knew what it meant. They had seen storms before, but this was different. This felt ancient, malicious. The first sign was the sky. It turned a bruised, sickly gray. Then the sea began to swell, not with normal waves, but with huge, oily mountains of water that seemed to move with a malevolent intelligence. The wind hit the tower like a physical blow. It wasn't just a sound. It was a force that made the 2-foot-thick granite walls groan and shudder. Inside, the men felt it in their bones. The constant, deep vibration of a structure under siege, like being trapped inside a bell being rung by a giant. This is when the official logbook, kept by Thomas Marshall, begins to tell a story of pure terror. His handwriting, usually neat and professional, becomes a frantic scrawl. On December 12th, he wrote of severe winds, the like of which I have never seen before in 20 years. The ink is slightly smeared, as if the very stone beneath him was trembling as he wrote. But the next part of his entry is what chills the blood. He notes that James Duckett, the principal keeper, and a man known for his steady calm, had become very quiet. This wasn't the silence of a man in thought. It was the stunned, hollow silence of a man staring into the abyss. And then, the most terrifying detail. William MacArthur, the toughest of the 3, a seasoned mariner known for his temper and for brawling in dockside pubs, was crying. Marshall doesn't elaborate, he just states it as a fact. Imagine the force required to break a man like that. A storm so violent, so unnatural, it could reduce a hardened sailor to tears. The psychological pressure inside that tower must have been unbearable. For 3 days, the storm raged without end. The men were trapped inside a stone drum, being beaten by the ocean. Sleep was impossible. The roar was constant, a physical presence that hammered at their skulls. Every few minutes, a wave would explode against the lantern room itself, 150 feet in the air. The thick glass would bow inwards, and the men would flinch, waiting for the inevitable shattering that would extinguish their light and doom them to darkness. They couldn't see the sky. They couldn't see the sea. Only a churning, violent wall of white spray and black water. Their world had shrunk to the inside of that tower, and that world was shaking itself apart. Food tasted like ash. Every swallow was an effort. The air was thick with the smell of salt and fear. They were living on nerves alone, waiting for the final impact that would tear their stone sanctuary from the rock and cast it into the sea. Then, on December 15th, the logbook entry changes. The frantic scrawl is gone, replaced by a hand that seems shaky with exhaustion and relief. Marshall writes that the storm has passed, the wind has died. The sea, while still agitated, is no longer trying to climb the tower. Sea calm, he notes. And then the final 3 words ever recorded from Eilean Mor: God is over all. It reads like a prayer from a man who has stared into the face of death and, against all odds, survived. The storm was over. The men were alive. The danger, it seemed, had passed. They could finally breathe. They could finally step outside and feel the sun on their faces. But their ordeal was just beginning. The storm had tested their minds. Now, the wounded island would test their bodies. And the silence that followed the storm was more dangerous than the noise itself. The first breath of fresh air must have felt like a miracle. After days trapped inside the tower, listening to the world tear itself apart, the silence was a gift. But when they stepped outside, the sight that greeted them was not one of peace. It was a scene of utter devastation. The storm had not just passed over Eilean Mor. It had tried to tear it from the sea. Their tiny kingdom of rock was savaged. A supply box on the eastern landing, thought to be sheltered, was smashed to pieces, its precious contents scattered like garbage. But the real problem, the immediate crisis, was on the western side. From the top of the cliff, they could see it. The western landing, their primary connection to the outside world, was a war zone. The heavy iron railings along the path down to the landing, thick as a man's arm, were bent and twisted into grotesque sculptures. A massive storage crate, weighing over a ton and bolted to the concrete, had been ripped from its moorings and thrown across the platform. Ropes, cranes, and essential gear lay in a tangled, dangerous mess, perilously close to the water's edge. This wasn't just damage. This was a direct threat to their survival. That equipment was their lifeline. Losing it meant a harder, more dangerous existence until the relief ship arrived, if it could even dock. They had survived the storm, but now they had to survive its consequences. The Northern Lighthouse Board regulations were absolute. One man must always remain inside the lighthouse, no exceptions. It was the golden rule of the service, drilled into every keeper. But the rulebook was written for storms, not for their aftermath. A tense, unspoken debate would have filled the small room. Marshall, the veteran, would have felt the crushing weight of the regulations. He knew the risks. But Duckett and MacArthur, younger and hardened by the siege, would have seen only a job that needed doing, and doing now. To wait was to risk the next tide stealing everything. The decision was made. They would break protocol. The most likely theory is that the 2 younger men, Duckett and MacArthur, decided to tackle the problem head-on. They would have put on their heavy, waterproof oilskins and sturdy boots, a familiar ritual that now felt different. They were preparing for a mission, not just a chore. Thomas Marshall, the veteran keeper, would have stayed behind, watching them from the lighthouse entrance. his stomach tight with anxiety. The sea was calm, the sky was clear. The risk seemed manageable, a calculated gamble. They needed to secure that gear before the Atlantic reclaimed it. Every step down the winding path was a test of nerve. The stone was slick with a treacherous film of salt and algae. They had to navigate around sections where the iron railings were simply gone, sheared off by the waves, leaving a sheer drop to the churning water below. Down on the landing platform, the cold was a physical presence, seeping through their boots and oilskins. Their fingers, already stiff, would have struggled with the frozen knots of the ropes. Their world was reduced to the task at hand, untangling, assessing, and salvaging. Their backs were turned to the vast gray expanse of the ocean. They weren't watching the sea. Why would they? The storm was over. The sea was calm. It was the ultimate betrayal. But the Atlantic Ocean doesn't forget. A storm of that magnitude creates immense energy deep beneath the surface. It can produce rogue waves, single, monstrous walls of water that travel for miles, appearing without warning in otherwise calm seas. From his perch in the tower, Marshall watched his men work. He would have seen the anomaly first, a line on the horizon that didn't belong. It wasn't breaking, it wasn't white with foam. It was a silent, dark bulge in the ocean's surface, a muscle flexing under the skin of the water. It moved with an unnatural speed, a predator that didn't need to announce its attack. His mind would have screamed before his mouth could. The warning he shouted was swallowed by the immense space, a useless gesture against the laws of physics. In that split second, instinct took over. His men were in danger. He didn't grab his own oilskins. He didn't even grab a coat. He just ran. He exploded into motion, kicking his chair over in his haste. That overturned chair, found by the relief crew, wasn't a sign of a fight with an intruder. It was the evidence of a fight against time. He slammed the door behind him and raced down the path to help them. But time had already run out. The wave hit the platform not with a crash, but with the force of an explosion. A solid, vertical wall of 100 tons of cold, dark water, moving at impossible speed. It didn't just wash over the landing, it scoured it clean. The force is unimaginable, not just sweeping the men away, but driving them into the rock, then pulling them back into the abyss in a single brutal motion. The water receded with a sickening hiss, pulling everything with it. Marshall, frozen on the path, would have stared at a landing that was now impossibly, terrifyingly clean. There were no bodies, no debris, no sign that his men had ever been there. The ocean was calm again, as if nothing had happened. The silence that returned was heavier, more profound than the noise of the storm. It was the silence of absence, the silence of a secret the sea would keep forever. One moment, 3 men were fighting to save their post. The next, there was nothing, just the empty rock, the calm sea, and a single set of oilskins hanging on a peg inside a silent lighthouse. 11 days of silence passed. Then, on December 26th, the relief ship Hesperus cut through a calm gray sea. Captain James Harvey stood on the bridge, his spyglass fixed on Eilean Mor. The dread was a cold weight in his gut. The island was silent, too silent. The lighthouse tower stood dark against the sky. No flag flew from the mast to signal all is well. No figures waited on the landing stage. Harvey ordered the ship's horn to be sounded, a loud blast that echoed off the cliffs and died without an answer. The silence that rushed back in was absolute. A volunteer was needed to go ashore. The relief keeper, Joseph Moore, stepped forward. Getting him onto the island was a battle in itself, the swell of the supposedly calm sea making it treacherous. As Moore began the long, lonely climb up the winding stone steps, every eye on the Hesperus followed him. He reached the heavy wooden door of the lighthouse and found it unlatched. He pushed it open and stepped from the cold sea air into a cold, dead silence. He had entered a tomb. The first thing he noticed was the quiet. The rhythmic ticking of the great clock was gone. It had stopped. In the kitchen, a meal of salted meat and potatoes sat on the table, cold and untouched. A last supper that was never eaten. One chair was overturned, kicked back in a moment of extreme haste. And then, the most chilling clue of all. On a peg by the door, a single set of oilskins hung, perfectly dry. 2 sets were missing, 1 remained. In this place, where protocol was life, this single detail screamed that something was terribly wrong. The official investigation, conducted by the Northern Lighthouse Board, was swift and pragmatic. Their conclusion was simple. The men had gone down to the western landing to secure damaged equipment after the storm. A freak wave, a monster born from the storm's dying energy, had appeared without warning and swept all 3 of them into the sea. Case closed. It's a clean, logical explanation. It accounts for the twisted railings, the missing supply crate, and the 2 missing sets of oilskins. It fits the known dangers of the North Atlantic. But the scene inside the lighthouse refuses to fit this neat narrative. The clues left behind don't just raise questions, they actively contradict the official story. Why would 3 experienced keepers, 2 of whom were wearing their heavy gear, be sitting down for a meal just before heading out to perform dangerous work on a storm-battered cliff edge? And the most damning piece of evidence, Thomas Marshall's oilskins hanging dry on their hook. Why would the most senior keeper, a man who lived by the rulebook for 2 decades, abandon all procedure and run out into the face of danger without his protective gear? The overturned chair suggests he left in a panic, a desperate rush. But what could make a veteran keeper forget the most basic rule of survival? The official report is an answer, but it's not the whole truth. The silence of the island holds the rest. In the vacuum of facts, speculation festered. The story of Eilean Mor escaped the pages of official reports and became a ghost story, a modern myth. People whispered of a fight among the men, a madness born of isolation that ended in murder and suicide. Others spoke of supernatural forces, of a ghost ship carrying them away, or a great sea serpent rising from the depths. Some even concocted elaborate theories of foreign spies abducting them for their knowledge of the coastline. These stories are born from a human need to find a reason for the unreasonable. But the truth is likely far simpler, and because of that, infinitely more terrifying. There was no monster from the deep. The monster was the sea itself. We must remember the state of these men. The logbook tells a story of minds under siege. They had survived days of relentless, terrifying assault. They were exhausted, sleep-deprived, and psychologically battered. In that state, judgment fails. The deceptive calm after the storm might have felt like a personal victory, making them feel invincible. Or perhaps the sight of the damage pushed them past a breaking point, creating a desperate urgency to fix their world, to restore order. They made a decision, a human decision, born of duty and exhaustion. They broke protocol to save their post. And the ocean, which has no sense of duty or heroism, simply took them. Their bodies were never recovered. The search parties found nothing. The North Atlantic swallowed them whole, leaving not a single trace. It keeps the secret of their final, terrifying moments locked in its cold, dark depths. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse was never again trusted to a permanent crew. The tragedy was a brutal lesson. In 1971, the lighthouse was automated. The human element was removed, replaced by machinery that feels no fear and makes no mistakes. Today, its powerful beam cuts through the darkness with perfect, lonely precision. It is a machine doing a job, but it is also a monument. A monument to the 3 men it was built to protect, but who were ultimately consumed by the very forces it was designed to defy. The mystery of Eilean Mor endures not because of ghosts or sea monsters, but because of its stark, human element. It is a story about the terrifying power of the natural world, a reminder that the planet we live on is not our friend. It is a hostile environment that operates on a scale we can barely comprehend. And in a single, indifferent moment, it can erase us completely, leaving behind only questions and a silence that echoes for over a century. The clues they left behind are a puzzle with no solution. A cold meal, an overturned chair, a coat left on a hook. These are the final silent words of Thomas Marshall, James Duckett, and Donald MacArthur. So, what do you believe happened on that rock? Do you accept the official report of a freak wave, a tragic but straightforward accident? Or do the strange clues inside the lighthouse convince you that a more complex, more desperate human drama unfolded in those final moments? Let us know your theory in the comments below. And if you believe that some secrets are worth pursuing, that some stories demand to be told, make sure you subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss our next investigation into the unknown.